How old is human civilization? Is it time to rewrite human history? In school, we are taught that human beings evolved in Central Africa about 200,000 years ago because that is the oldest human remains we have found. Well, until recently, when a new discovery was made, this time in Morocco, and this time we had to push the date back 100,000 more years, and also the supposed cradle of human beings. But just because we haven't found any skeletons that are older doesn't mean that humans haven't existed for a longer time than that. There are very few skeleton findings that we actually have, and to rule out completely that we could be much older and that there could have been civilizations before 7,000 years ago would be premature. Because that's what we learn in school. We lived in caves for a few 100,000 years. Then, magically, we discovered agriculture at almost the same time in 3 different places on Earth. This happened almost simultaneously in the modern-day Middle East, the Indus Valley in China, about 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. Then, Sumer was the supposedly first civilization. And from there, we built the pyramids about 4,500 years ago, a date that was set for the pyramids by Napoleon's so-called scientists more than 200 years ago. And after that, this has been the accepted date. It was of course thought that the pyramids were built by slaves too, but that has been proven to be false. And most fascinating of all is that the biggest, most sophisticated pyramids of them all, the Giza pyramids, are the first ones built. After that, the quality of the pyramids becomes of lesser and lesser quality, something Egyptology, clinging to this 200-year-old theory, has big trouble explaining. But new evidence shows us that we might have been misinterpreting or misunderstood the traces we have from the past. What if we took a new look at what we have with open eyes and an open mind? Where would the trail take us? Would we rethink our former stance? Or will it prove that we have it all correct? Everything about history as we know it is true, and all of these people and scientists who say otherwise are crazy conspiracy theorists? Let's find out. Hi, and welcome to History with Magnus. In this video, we are going to take a look at what evidence there are for a much older human civilization, or civilizations. We are going to take a closer look at the asteroid impact that happened about 11,000 years ago, what it did, how it changed the climate and cast the planet into an ice age that lasted for 1,200 years, throwing human civilization back to being hunter-gatherers again. It would be remembered as a human apocalypse in almost all religions after that. In Christianity, it was Noah and the Great Flood. In Norse mythology, it was Ragnarok, and almost all other religions have a story about a great cataclysm, seen as the vengeance of the angry gods for humans' bad behavior. But let us listen to Graham Hancock explaining what this theory is all about, and I will explain what he is talking about in more detail after that.
Even in 1995, the notion of a lost civilization was not a new idea. That notion has been around for a very long time. We can take that notion actually back thousands and thousands of years. The most famous example is Plato, the Greek philosopher Plato, who gave us the story of Atlantis. From Plato comes the story of Atlantis, a great advanced civilization which had navigating and seafaring skills, which could explore the world, which built gigantic buildings, which had advanced knowledge in every area, which was prosperous and powerful. But then Plato says that corruption crept into this society, that it became cruel and avaricious, it became greedy, it began to impose its power around the world. And he has a very ringing phrase. He said that Atlantis ceased to wear its prosperity with moderation. And the suggestion is that it's this hubris, this conceit of Atlantis, that it had become so sure of itself that somehow the universe struck it down, and we have the cataclysm of flood and disaster, and that Atlantis is submerged beneath the waves. Now, of course, the view of historians and academics is that Plato's story is just made up. He just made it up to make some political or philosophical point. But this cannot be so. That view can't be right. I was very suspicious of that view the first time I heard it from a mainstream historian. Why are they saying that Plato made this up? Plato repeatedly states that it is a true story. And as we look into it further, we find something else, that Plato puts a date on the destruction of Atlantis. He says Atlantis was submerged beneath the waves in a huge global cataclysm 9,000 years before the time of Solon. We know Solon, we know who he was. Solon was a famous Greek lawmaker. He was an ancestor of Plato, as a matter of fact, about 200 years before Plato. And around 600 BC, Solon, the great Greek lawmaker, made a visit to Egypt. And in Egypt, the priests at a temple of Sais in the Delta told him the story of Atlantis. And they said that it was written on the walls of the temple. And he said, when did this happen? When was this great civilization destroyed? And they said 9,000 years ago. And that was in 600 BC. So that's 9,600 BC in our calendar. That's 11,600 years ago. Plato is telling us a great civilization was destroyed in a global cataclysm of flood 11,600 years ago. He's laughed at by all academics and historians. But then geology comes along, and lo and behold, what do we find? 11,600 years ago is a truly cataclysmic episode in geological history. It's called Meltwater Pulse 1b. We have a massive rise in sea level as the ice sheets on North America and Northern Europe just crumble and collapse into the ocean. If Plato made the whole thing up, he was just astonishingly on the money with the latest geology. And I think that we really have to reconsider our attitudes to these stories that have come down to us from the past. Academics have been too quick to dismiss them, too quick to say, oh, we've figured the whole story out, there's no mystery there. Maybe there's a huge mystery there. Maybe we should listen to these clues and hints from the past that speak of a great civilization. The problem is that new evidence keeps coming out, which can't be explained by the existing historical model. New evidence that just doesn't fit the picture. And my sense is that this evidence is now becoming overwhelming and that we're reaching a tipping point. Maybe not this year, maybe not next year. But within our lifetimes, we are going to see a completely new understanding of the past, a radical revisioning of the past, and therefore of our place in the world as well. We talked at the beginning of this discussion about Plato's Atlantis story and how he said that Atlantis went down 11,600 years ago. That's the date of the foundation of Göbekli Tepe. Very set, very clear, absolutely founded 11,600 years ago. Exactly the date that Plato gives for the ending of Atlantis. And Göbekli Tepe doesn't fit. It just comes out of nowhere. Out of nowhere. They haven't built anything ever. And then suddenly, without any background or any preparation, appears this huge megalithic site, which is incredibly sophisticated. Turns out, because a large part of it's still under the ground, seen with ground-penetrating radar, that the whole site is actually 50 times bigger than Stonehenge and 7,000 years older. So how do we account for this? Did a group of hunter-gatherers in Turkey wake up one morning, magically inspired, that they suddenly knew how to cut and quarry stone, move blocks weighing in some cases up to 50 tons, create gigantic stone circles in an area with no water, involving bringing a labor force and organizing that labor force and feeding and watering them, to create the world's first perfectly north-south aligned building, which involves accurate astronomy, to do all of that, and at the same time to invent agriculture. Because at the same moment that Göbekli Tepe pops up, suddenly agriculture appears in that same region of Turkey. It's obvious to me that that wasn't a group of hunter-gatherers who woke up one morning suddenly equipped with the skills. What we're looking at is a transfer of technology. This was the survivors of a lost civilization. They already knew how to create megaliths. They already knew how to do agriculture. They settled amongst a hunter-gatherer people who they may have reached out to before. They settled amongst them and they created this project. And this project was to restart their civilization. It didn't quite work. But they got somewhere. They created this huge site. They invented agriculture. We are all the descendants of that. All of the agriculture in the world today began around Göbekli Tepe 11,600 years ago. First of all, it's important to understand that the Earth changes that took place between 12,800 and 11,600 years ago were utterly cataclysmic, beyond all imagining. The science is now in, it's very clear. We had an interaction with the fragments of a very large comet, a giant comet, which originally may have been as much as 100 miles in diameter. It was drawn into the inner solar system about 20,000 years ago. These things come from very far away. They come from a place called the Oort cloud, which is almost light year away. It's so far away. It's so far away. A huge sphere of trillions of comets in the very outer solar system. But disturbances, gravitational disturbances, can send comets out of those safe orbits, winging in towards the inner solar system. It happens from time to time. And the evidence now is that we got one of those, a big one, about 100 miles in diameter, about 20,000 years ago. It entered an orbit that crosses the orbit of the Earth. And for the next 8,000 years, nothing bad happened. They missed each other. But 12,800 years ago, at least 8 pieces of this large comet, some of them up to a mile in diameter, hit the Earth. 50 million square kilometers of the Earth's surface was devastated by this comet impact. Sea levels rose rapidly, and the Earth's climate plunged into a dreadful deep freeze that lasted 1,200 years. This event was of a scale, of a magnitude, that is quite capable of having wiped out almost all traces of a former civilization. And that's why I think again about what Plato had to say, and I think also about our civilization, because we feel that we've got it all sorted out. If, for example, we were to face another comet impact as we did 12,800 years ago, then all the fragile networks that tie our society together would fall apart. And I don't believe that our civilization would survive such a cataclysm. Human beings would definitely survive, but our civilization would not survive because, contrary to its surface appearances, it's actually very fragile and very easily broken. Those who would survive the cataclysm would be hunter-gatherers, people like the Kalahari Bushmen or the hunter-gatherers of the Amazon basin. They would hardly notice it, as a matter of fact. Hunter-gatherers are in the business of survival in very difficult circumstances, and they would get through it. We would not. Very few people in modern Western technological society know how to survive at all. We have no survival skills whatsoever. Food supply into our cities is on a just-in-time basis, 2-3 days maximum food supply in a city, then you have people starving. How rapidly and radically this civilization would fall apart faced by a gigantic cataclysm, it's almost impossible to describe. The people who would carry the human story forward would be the hunter-gatherers. And 10,000 years from now, their descendants might tell a story about how there had been a time when there was a great civilization on this earth. So advanced, its powers were almost miraculous. Do you know, they could send people to the moon. They could fly around the world. They could speak to each other on other sides of the planet. But something went wrong. They became cruel. They became arrogant. They began to impose their will on others. They ceased to wear their prosperity with moderation, and the universe struck them down. I think there's a message in the Atlantis story for our civilization. We should stop being so fucking arrogant and proud in our achievements. We should show some humility, and we should learn the lessons of the past.
Remember to hit that subscribe button for more videos about history. And I hope to see you in the next one.